Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications here at SBAM. So, Brian, let's start with some reaction and insight from the shocking events that took place over the weekend.
Yeah, in the middle of such a heated political season, an assassination attempt on a major political candidate or major presidential candidate and also former President Donald Trump. There'll be, of course, investigations and inquiries into what exactly happened over that span of time. How could something like that have happened? From kind of a moment in time, there's this reaction, like a self-reflection, I think that a lot of people are having of like, hey, maybe we need to tamp down this rhetoric a little bit and not feed into this kind of level of vitriol. And while this is a situation that's not happened in a very long time, unfortunately, it probably won't tamp down the rhetoric for very long. I think that we'll probably see a resumption of the same type of kind of back and forth interactions that we've been seeing escalating over the course of recent years, with both sides pointing at the other side as justification for their part in the escalation. So unfortunately, it probably won't change things for very long, but indeed, truly, truly shocking. I've heard a lot of discussion about, a threat to democracy, but certainly assassination of presidential candidates are the sorts of things that I think could be very uniformly classified as a threat to democracy. People were afraid to run. So hopefully we won't see anything of that nature in the future, but probably will not substantively change the nature of the interactions between the parties for very long.
All right, well, thanks for the insight there. Now we'll move on to the rest of the show. First off, we're going to clear something up quickly. The Trump administration and the national GOP have filed a lawsuit, and some people were confused and thought it was against us. So, what's the story?
Yeah, so there are some complaints that were reported on earlier this year that the Small Business Administration office in Michigan, so Small Business Administration, we are the Small Business Association of Michigan, very similar sounding name, completely different organization, no affiliation, connection, and of any sort, just similar sounding names. So anyway, there was a lawsuit that was filed in federal court that was accusing the Veteran Affairs Association offices in Michigan and also the Small Business Administration offices here in Michigan for illegally participating in voter registration efforts to benefit Democrats alleged in the lawsuit. So, but because the USSBA is such a similar sounding name to ours, there had been a few inquiries like, "Whoa, are you guys getting sued?" Nope, we're not. We just happen to have a similar name to an organization getting sued.
Well, thanks for clearing that up. Let's stick with federal politics and talk about the US Senate race. So you've indicated that you think Alyssa Slotkin will come out on top of the Democratic primary, but there's some new polling for the Republicans. What does that show?
Yeah, and it probably makes sense to mention too, by the way, just minutes ago or half an hour ago, I don't know, it was Alyssa Slotkin did announce her fundraising haul for the last let me see, total for the last, well, actually it's over the whole cycle, but anyway, um no, just for the last quarter. I'm sorry, $6.5 million. I mean, just incredible uh fundraising numbers that continue to be posted in what will be one of the most competitive Senate races in the country. And but on the other side of the ticket, you have what was considered maybe to be a more competitive primary. So Hill Harper versus Slotkin. Slotkin looks to be in the driver's seat. The In the Republican primary, a little different. We have, let me see here, we've got Mike Rogers and Justin Amash. So both of them former members of Congress. Sandy Pensler, who is a business owner, and then Sherry O'Donnell. In the Terrence group that did a poll for the Rogers campaign had Mike Rogers up 38 points. And while that is a campaign internal poll, it is a reputable polling organization, and so that it's an indication. It looked like Rogers was in the driver's seat in that election, and their internal polling that they decided to go ahead and release for obvious reasons would support that. Most observers believe that come August, it will be narrowed down to two, and it will be Alyssa Slotkin versus Mike Rogers. Again, I expect it to be one of the top most competitive races in the nation.
All right, let's look at the congressional side. We've talked about Representative Kildee and his retirement. So what's happening in the race to replace him? And as a reminder, this seat covers the Saginaw Bay, Genesee, and Midland County areas.
Yeah, it looks like State Senator Kristen McDonald Rivet is in good shape to win her primary to replace Kildee. She had posted some pretty impressive fundraising numbers, about 750,000 in the 3 months that ended June 30th. There's also in the primary there a former mayor of Flint that is running, Matt Collier, and then an individual that's on the State Board of Education, Pamela Poe, and so it is a competitive primary, but it does definitely look like Kristen McDonald Rivet is in pretty good shape. She, by the way, did recently get Dan Kildee's endorsement, the incumbent endorsement as well. And then on the other side of the ticket, so this is the one that's very much considered a swing seat. This is a seat where the numbers between Trump and Biden last time were really quite close. Expected that the top of the ticket will make this a close race. Republicans, Mary Draves of Midland, who is a former Dow executive, and then Paul Young, who's an attorney, who's put in a fair amount of resources, has personal resources to put in to run a pretty serious campaign. He's run in the seat before against Kildee, but has never run when it was open. And then Anthony Hudson from Grand Blanc Township, whom I don't know much about. So there is there's a pretty active race on that side, although Paul Young looks spelled with a J, by the way, Young spelled with a J. It looks like Rivet and Young are in the driver's seat in that race.
All right, let's go to the other side of the state and talk about the 3rd district in Grand Rapids.
In the Grand Rapids congressional race is a pretty interesting one. It's one that I wasn't sure would be how competitive it would be, given that Hillary Skolton, the current member of Congress, the incumbent, won by a pretty good sized margin before. However, she was one of the few congressional Democrats to come out and call for Biden to step aside, which is not. I was surprised by that. I mean, I wasn't surprised that some are doing it, but she doesn't normally rock the boat. Is somebody that is not usually going to be edgy, and to do something like be one of the early ones to call for the president to step aside in her own party. And so so that was a bit of a surprise. She does, I think, have a primary challenger, but I don't think it's a particularly serious one. On the other side of the ticket, though, is Paul Hudson. Now, you might recall Paul Hudson was a Michigan Supreme Court candidate before, and has been able to raise pretty respectable resources, and also his brother, I think, had started a super PAC to support his efforts as well. That race is looking more and more competitive as one that didn't necessarily look like it was going to be, but the fact that Skolton called for Biden to step aside told me that maybe Biden's numbers in that district, in this West Michigan district, aren't is looking as good as they did 4 years ago when he ran. And so this call for him to step aside may have been driven by what she was seeing in her own constituency's numbers. And so this is one that I think we're going to keep a closer eye on. Again, SBM doesn't make federal endorsements. We make state election endorsements. But of course, we keep close track of these things and try to um, understand what the positions of all the candidates are at the federal level, and also let our members know exactly where things stand.
And just a reminder, in case you weren't tuned in last week, all of our endorsements are on the website. If you just navigate to advocacy, you'll see a page with all of the endorsements for Michigan's House of Representatives. All right, so Brian, earlier this year, we talked about automakers and their negotiations with the UAW under the new president. The court-appointed monitor for the UAW filed a report making some serious accusations. What were they?
Yeah, this is, we talked just a little bit about this a few weeks ago, but we didn't have a lot of information at the time. So Sean Fain, who's quite famous now in terms of just the way that he went through those last union negotiations, very abrasive and kind of looked like almost like a figurative fist fight in moving through that whole process. So there's a federal court monitor that was appointed because of the problems that the UAW had under previous leadership. A couple of former presidents are in prison. And so because of different illegal activities, there's a monitor that supervises what happens there. And so this monitor had filed a report, and that report had indicated that there was a, quote, culture of fear and retaliation, end quote, in the union. There were concerns over centralizing oversight of the president's office, and some slowness in instituting adopted reforms. So, and it did kind of, one of the illustrations that was reported on was an effort to get health insurance for his fiance and his fiance's sister, and in a way that others had kind of blown the whistle on, if you will, and then there was some retaliation because of it. That sort of thing is definitely a difficult aspect to deal with when, for as much as he came out as a fighter and like he's cleaning up the UAW from what it was in the past, this type of report certainly doesn't help the image of the UAW moving forward. And I expect that, Fain's not the kind of person who takes things laying down. So I expect that the back and forth with this monitor might escalate as opposed to, and normally you would see this sort of thing really kind of tamp down quickly because the monitor is appointed by the court and is just doing his job. But I think we might see a little bit of escalation on this one.
All right, let's go back to some election related news and talk about ballot initiatives. Are there any on tap for this fall here in Michigan?
We've had so many cycles where it's like, how are we going to keep track of all these different ballot initiatives that are kind of in the works and might be on the ballot and might not be, or in some cases, I remember one year we had 5 or 6 on the ballot. For the first time, though, since 2016, there will be no ballot questions. You might have some local ones in your local elections, local school millage or something like that. But in terms of like a statewide ballot on a citizens initiated law or an amendment to the Constitution or anything like that, the deadline's passed. There won't be any. And so that's kind of a surprise, because there were a bunch of things kind of kicking around there, several things that seemed like they might make its way up. So from a statewide basis, you'll have candidates to look at, but no questions or proposals to modify law or the Constitution.
All right, new inflation numbers were released last week amid a lot of other news. How are things looking?
The inflation numbers are actually, I would say, pretty encouraging this month. So they came in a little bit under what analysts had expected. So the overall inflation at 3% year over year. So this, if you're to look at the June, these are for June. So the June numbers of 2024, three CPI, that bundle of goods in the CPI, 3% higher than June of 2023. The core, which takes out food and gas, the that was 3.3, so a little worse when you look at the non-commodity items in that bundle of goods. So I would say generally this was an encouraging report. When it gets even more encouraging, though, is if you look at the monthly numbers and month over month numbers. We have 2 months in a row where the increase year over year might look like 3%, but month over month actually down a little bit. So that's so I would say generally encouraging, not like headline type encouraging, but I would say that more evidence moving in the right direction, and also increasing the odds that we will see a September rate cut.
All right, well, thanks for the report there. All right, we talked a lot about electric vehicles on the briefing, and now it appears as though the feds are stepping up incentives for electric vehicles as the demand and sales are falling.
Yeah, I think there's some real concern about the demand falling and electric vehicle, the scaling back of some of these projects that were running hot and heavy, or that were being planned or were on the books in recent years. And mainly it's because consumer demand has just not been there. And also just the infrastructure has not been built out to support the charging of the vehicles as well, particularly when people are traveling. So the federal government, though, has stepped in to put, they're providing 1.7 billion in grants to help revitalize 11 shuttered or at-risk auto manufacturing and assembling facilities. This is across the country, but there are two of them here in Michigan that are going to get those resources. And this was announced by none other than Jennifer Granholm, who's the U.S. Department of Energy Secretary. Plants that are located in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, and Virginia. So the press release claimed that it could result in, I did like the honesty of this. It could result, not that it will, it could result in the creation of 2,900 new jobs or retention of 15,000 current jobs. General Motors and Stellantis NV are slated to receive, I think, more than anybody. And then, but it's General Motors, the Lansing General Grand River facility, which is actually just like, I can practically see it from my office here, is one of the plants. And then another one that I wasn't familiar with, which let's see, what was it called? ZF North America Inc. Will receive 158 million to retool a portion of its plant in Marysville and St. Clair County. So Ingham and St. Clair are the two projects in Michigan. So the Fed's kind of getting in on maybe filling some gaps in incentives that for an industry that really was kind of losing some of its energy. And clearly these automakers have been either scaling back or considering scaling back some of their future plans to move forward with electrification, kind of putting more ifs in the equation as opposed to treating these things like they're done deals. I think the federal incentives, it really does, it probably does create an environment where where a General Motors, for example, could say, well, yeah, maybe there's not demand, but hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government will make up the difference.
So I didn't hear Ford on that list. Any thoughts as to why? And then when we're talking about Ford, what's the latest on the Marshall plant that we've talked about on this show?
Yeah, so Ford was actually moving forward with electrification just as aggressively as anybody else, but then had announced a pretty substantial scale back of that Marshall plant. And so what's interesting, there hasn't been a lot of discussion. Ford was not on the list of those receiving incentives from the federal government. This is just speculation, but my speculation is that they don't want to develop something or accept incentives to develop something that they don't think that the market is there for. So they just did not receive any of those resources. And it may have looked bad for them to get those resources while they are scaling back the Marshall plant. And the overall, that plant originally was going to be like 3.5 billion in incentives. And let me see here, I think I made a couple notes on that. They were 3.5 billion and 2,500 new jobs. And they've said, it'd probably be more like 2.5 billion, maybe 1,700 to 2,100 jobs, more of a range. And so they had to renegotiate their incentives that with the state of Michigan had given very substantial incentives. And so there are several kind of changes through it. The biggest change is the elimination of the 15-year Renaissance zone, but then they added in which is like 750 or $770 million is the value of that particular incentive. They added in a more generous PA 198, which is a partial property tax break. And when all is said and done, their incentives reduced about $600 million. So that plant is still being built. The capacity to be a big plant with high capacity just won't be as big as it was before. So I think Ford had already kind of set its course, the direction it was going to go, and just kind of didn't fit in with the agenda of the U.S. Department of Energy. Oh,
All right.
one other thing I was going to mention too, that Ford put out their sales numbers, and they actually look pretty good compared to the others. That theirs were up, and I thought it was interesting that theirs were up based on hybrid. So it's not that people are moving away from the idea of energy efficient cars. It's just all electric is something that the market is just not there yet, or at least not as much as the policymakers want it to be. And so Ford has done really well with hybrids. And the thing that was highlighted in the sales numbers was this new little pickup, the Maverick, which, by the way, full disclosure, I have one. I got one from the very first time it came out. Smaller pickups, very efficient. But anyway, it had a big part of their sales going up. And especially the hybrid Maverick. And a huge percentage of those sales, and I'm not going to come up with it right quick here, but a huge percentage of those sales actually came from people that used to buy other manufacturers. So I think Ford is just kind of growing more confident in their ability to just know where the market is and hit their sales targets, and maybe leave some of these state and federal incentives on the table, and have more confidence just in meeting the demands of the market rather than the demands of the political policymakers.
All right, let's finish up today's show with a brief Data Monday report.
All right, so we've got some interesting things to talk about as usual on Data Monday. So let's go back to the beginning of this report. And all right, first is property values, home prices across the United States. And so here are 10 markets that are leading the way, including a bunch of them that you wouldn't have expected, like old industrial cities that property values have started to rise again. And so Riverside, or yeah, Riverside and Los Angeles, that area, high property prices. And in New York, those, of course, you would expect to see, but Buffalo, New York, Cleveland, and in Tennessee, we always hear about Nashville, but Memphis. Remember, these are percentage increases. So these are areas that had been low and now increasing. The insurance, home insurance rates. This is just another one that I thought was interesting, so I would share it with you. Michigan actually doing pretty well when it comes to our homeowners insurance rates compared to much of the rest of the country. The lighter the shade, the better in this particular graph. You can see the areas that have more natural disaster risks, be it hurricanes and tornadoes and things, higher rates. And then there's a series of graphs here on the National Federation of Independent Business annual monthly survey. And in this case, I wanted to show, I want to show this one because it shows the average short-term rate. So think like the line of credit rates that small businesses are paying. It's averaging, people are reporting an average of 9.5%. You can see that's a higher rate than what had been typical or customary in recent years. Asking businesses, is it a good time to expand? Well, about 4% say yes. So that's been down around, under 10% since the pandemic, basically. And then this chart is showing small businesses that are experiencing higher prices and those who say that poor sales are their single biggest problem. And so you see not very many small businesses are saying, hey, poor sales levels are my biggest problem, only 6%. And then looking at the those that are saying that they're experiencing higher prices, about pretty level, pretty steady. The price plans for the next 3 months, as you can see with this chart, that again, not a big range in recent years. This particular answer, 26%. The job openings hard to fill, and hiring plans. You can see like the job openings that are hard to fill it's generally coming down in that trend. And then also, but also those that are planning to hire in the future coming down as well, although it's up a little bit this last month. So this is the big one. Just wanted to share the inflation numbers. So 3.3% in terms of the core inflation and 3% overall. So again, an encouraging month, but not not yet at that 2% target. And then looking at where the increases came from, the utilities and motor vehicle insurance, dairy products, those were up. But then on the downside, gasoline, month over month, it went down a little bit this past month. Fuel oil, used cars still coming down, and airfares month over month was a little down too. Last chart is just looking at the super core. So this is looking at monthly inflation, okay, monthly inflation, not annualized, and but taking out food, energy, and housing. So the things that move, they're independent things that make those things move up and down. They're harder to move in some ways, and more volatile. So if you look at everything else, this is where you see a couple months in a row of deflation. So and I think that's why I think generally this is a June would have been an encouraging month for the Federal Reserve that would further open the door for them to consider a rate cut real soon.
All right. Well, thanks for the report, Brian, and thanks for tuning in today. We'll be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you in a week.